His name was Shotwell. He died on May 13, 1841. He had been on the Oregon Trail fewer than 2 weeks. He wasn't killed by the mountains. He wasn't swept away at a river crossing. Diarist John Bidwell recorded what happened. Shotwell was taking a gun out of the wagon and drew it with the muzzle towards him in such a manner that it went off and shot him near the heart. He lived about an hour. He died, in Bidwell's words, in full possession of his senses. He was the first recorded firearm fatality on the Oregon Trail, and the manner of his death wasn't a fluke. Trail diaries would repeat some version of that story dozens of times over the next 3 decades. Every school history lesson covers the Oregon Trail the same way. The Rockies, the desert, the high mountain passes. The legend places the danger at the far end of the journey, the part where the terrain gets dramatic and the stakes feel cinematic. But when you apply forensic epidemiology to the actual death records, when you read the trail diaries and the mortality analysis, a different picture comes into focus. The most dangerous stretch of the Oregon Trail wasn't in the mountains. It was in the first 200 miles, sometimes the first few weeks, sometimes before the wagon had even found its rhythm. I've gone through the primary diary evidence and the mortality data, and what I found inverts the standard story. Let me show you why. Between 1840 and 1860, historian John Unruh established in his definitive 1979 study, The Plains Across, a Pulitzer Prize finalist, that approximately 4% of Oregon Trail travelers died, which out of an estimated 400,000 total emigrants equates to roughly 16,000 deaths. The National Park Service's estimate runs higher, closer to 1 in 10. The trail has been called the nation's longest graveyard for documented reasons, an average of 20 graves per mile across 2,000 miles. The 4 leading causes of death across the trail diaries: disease fur, accounting for 9 out of 10 deaths per Unruh. Accident second. Accidental firearm discharges. Third, drownings at river crossings. Fourth, the cause that Hollywood always puts at the top of the list, attacks by Native Americans, killed fewer than 350 pioneers in the entire period from 1840 to 1860. Accidental gunshots alone killed approximately 100 times more people than Indian attacks. The danger wasn't where the legend put it. Now here is the forensic question that changes everything. When exactly were people dying? The standard mental image is a wagon train deep in the Rockies or staggering across the Nevada desert. The epidemiological evidence points somewhere else entirely, back to the very beginning, the jumping-off towns. Independence and St. Joseph, Missouri, were where most emigrants gathered each spring to buy supplies and organize their parties. In the late 1840s and early 1850s, those towns became cholera incubators. Thousands of people crowded into the same streets, drinking from the same contaminated water sources, sharing the same camps. The bacterium responsible, Vibrio cholera, spreads through water and food contaminated by human fecal matter. Its incubation period runs from 12 hours to 5 days. A family could drink contaminated water in Independence, climb into their wagon feeling completely fine, and be dead before they reach the Kansas border. The National Park Service documents this directly. Cholera struck each spring at the thronging jumping-off towns along the Missouri River. The deadly disease claimed many lives before the victims even had a chance to start across the prairies of Kansas or Nebraska. That isn't a footnote in trail history. It's the core forensic fact about when Oregon Trail mortality actually happened. The mechanism of death was specific and well documented. Vibrio cholerae produces a toxin that floods the intestinal wall with fluid. Victims can lose 10 to 20 liters of water in a matter of hours. Without electrolyte replacement, which did not exist as a medical concept on the frontier, the case fatality rate in untreated patients reached up to 60%. Pioneers had a name for it. They called it the Blue Death. That refers to the bluish skin discoloration that develops when a person is dying of severe dehydration. Nobody on the trail in 1849 knew what was causing it. The bacterium Vibrio cholerae was not scientifically isolated until 1883, when Robert Koch identified it. On the trail, they called it cramps, and watched it move through a camp faster than they could dig graves. Between 1849 and 1855, an estimated 6,000 to 12,000 people died of cholera on the combined overland trails. In St. Louis alone in 1849, one of the primary supply cities for westward emigrants, over 4,000 people died of cholera before the emigration season had even ended. People were walking into the jumping-off towns already incubating the disease. The letter evidence is specific and devastating. In 1852, a young woman in the Friel party wrote to her uncle from somewhere in the trail's earliest section. First of all, Frances Friel did June 4th, and Maria Friel followed the 6th. Next came Polly Kasner, who died the 9th, and Lafayette Friel soon followed. He died the 11th, and her baby died the 17th. 7 people in 13 days. All cholera, all in the earliest miles of the journey. And here is the epidemiological detail that explains the clustering. The analysis of trail mortality shows cholera was specifically concentrated in the first portion, from Missouri through eastern Nebraska to approximately Fort Laramie in Wyoming. The Platte River, the primary water source across Nebraska, had an alkaline chemistry that allowed Vibrio cholera to survive longer in the water than in the colder, cleaner mountain streams to the west. Population density was highest at the start, with thousands of wagons using the same campsites and contaminating the same water sources. As wagon trains spread out and climbed to higher, cooler elevations, the disease's reach diminished. The trail's deadliest disease was front-loaded at the start, not distributed evenly across the 2,000 miles. A woman named Cecilia Adams counted 401 fresh graves during her 1852 crossing. 401 in a single season. Most were in the early segment. Now the guns. Shotwell was the first. He wasn't close to the last. The trail diaries document accidental firearm deaths with a regularity that reads as almost routine. The OCTA's research into trail firearms accidents confirms the pattern. Inexperienced handlers, loaded weapons, a moment of carelessness near a wagon. The reason so many emigrants were inexperienced is straightforward. The majority of westbound migrants were farmers, tradespeople, and eastern city residents who had purchased firearms specifically for the journey, to hunt game, and largely irrationally out of fear of attack. A 1846 diary entry documents one wagon train of 72 wagons carrying 260 rifles and pistols, a ton of lead, and half a ton of gunpowder. When people who have never handled a loaded rifle in the field routinely reach for them muzzle first while unloading moving wagons, the outcome follows. The Oregon-California Trails Association compiled diary accounts from multiple trail years. Near the Big Blue River in eastern Kansas, diarist William Johnston recorded that a man named John Fuller accidentally shot and killed himself whilst removing a gun from a wagon. The mode was the usual one, never yet patented and open to all. The muzzle was toward him and went off of itself. The phrase "the usual one" is the forensic tell. This was happening with enough regularity that experienced trail travelers had a shorthand for the mechanism. Another diarist, Mrs. E.D.S. Gear, wrote, "Today, when our hunters came in, they brought one dead man. He had shot himself last night accidentally. He left a wife and 6 small children. The distress of his wife I cannot describe." Frontier medical historian Peter D. Olsch whose research on trail injuries is cited by the OCTA, established that being run over by wagon wheels was the single most frequent cause of injury or death overall. Children were especially vulnerable. A prairie schooner weighed approximately 1,200 to 1,300 pounds empty, Britannica's figure, and loaded with a family's provisions, the total reached 3,000 to nearly 4,000 pounds. Iron-rimmed wheels, 5 feet high. No suspension. Oxen controlled by spoken commands from a driver walking alongside. When a child slipped getting in or out, the physics didn't negotiate. July 18, 1943. Joel Jordan Hembree, 6 years old, was riding on the wagon tongue, the long wooden shaft connecting the wagon to the oxen, when he fell off. Both wheels rolled across him. Diarist William Thompson Newby recorded it the way trail deaths were recorded, with the exhausted brevity of people who had no time to stop. Joel J. Hembree's son Joel fell off the wagon tongue, and both wheels run over him. Joel died the following day, July 19, 1943. He was buried in a dresser drawer, the only container his family had available. His grave, located between Bedtick Creek and Laprelle Creek near present-day Douglas, Wyoming, is the oldest marked grave ever found on the Oregon Trail. It was discovered in 1961 when a reservoir threatened the site. Richard Harvey, 8 years old, 1847. His diarist, Absalom Hardin, wrote it as he spoke. Mr. Harvey's young little boy Richard, 8 years old, went to get in the wagon and fell from the tongue. The wheels run over him and mashed his head and kill him stone dead. He never moved. These weren't exceptional events on the trail. They were the expected toll of putting inexperienced families who had never managed draft animals, never handled loaded rifles in the field, never forded rivers in a loaded wagon on a 2,000-mile route, and watching the first few hundred miles collect them before they had time to learn. Now, the diary. Amelia Stewart Knight departed Monroe County, Iowa, on April 9, 1853, with her husband, Dr. Joel Knight, and their 7 children. She was already pregnant with their 8th child, a fact she never once mentions in the diary because discussing pregnancy was considered improper in 1853. She delivered that child on the side of the road near the end of the journey in September. Her diary, published in the Transactions of the 56th Annual Reunion of the Oregon Pioneer Association in 1933, is one of the most detailed first-hand records of the trail's opening segment. Her first entry, April 9, started from home about 11 o'clock and traveled 8 miles and camped in an old house, night cold and frosty. 8 miles. That is the entire first day. April 16, a week in. Almira says she wished she were home, and I say ditto. Home sweet home. April 23. Still in camp, it rained hard all night and blew a hurricane almost. All the tents were blown down and some wagons capsized. The Knight family survived. 14 days out, wagons capsizing. The disease, the guns, the wagon wheels, none of it caught them. But they were moving through the same Kansas and Nebraska corridor where the Friel party had lost 7 people to cholera just the year before. Same rivers, same camps, same water. What Amelia Knight's diary captures, without ever once dramatizing it, is the texture of early segment danger, the cold first nights before the travelers had adjusted, the capsized wagons before anyone knew how to read the weather on open prairie, the loaded firearms in the hands of people who had never used them in the field. So what does the forensic picture actually show? The mountains were dangerous. River crossings were dangerous. The late trail obstacles were real. Nobody is revising those facts, but the mortality data clusters at the beginning, not the end. Cholera incubated in the crowded jumping-off towns and killed in the first weeks. before emigrants had even reached open prairie. Accidental firearms deaths peaked when handlers were newest to the field. Wagon crush injuries hit hardest when families were still learning the behavior of draft animals on unfamiliar terrain. Shotwell, Day 12. Joel Hembree, July 19th. The Friel family within 13 days of departure. John Unruh noted that emigrants were twice as likely to die on the trail as Civil War soldiers were in combat, and 4 times as likely to die as civilians staying home. The trail was genuinely one of the most statistically dangerous undertakings in 19th century American life. And the forensic evidence says the most dangerous part was the part the emigrants were least prepared to fear. Amelia Knight reached Oregon in September. She had her 8th child on the side of the road. She came into Oregon on a flatboat, then a canoe. Her first home was a log cabin with no windows. Her diary ends with no word of complaint. Just this: the journey was done. That is the forensic verdict. The first night was not the romantic start of a great American adventure. For hundreds of families, it was the most dangerous night they would ever survive.